All right, good afternoon, Auntie Noreen.
Hello there, my Vince. How are you?
We're here to have we'll have a cup of tea and a chat here by the fire.
Yes.
I'm
We had some delicious Irish bread there too.
very excited to be here with you, and I just wanted to ask you a few questions. And I know we've talked about it, so you're prepared in a little bit, but really to get your story and understand your upbringing, where you came from, because I think it's important that we capture this for our children and their children. Of course, I know a lot about you, so I might ask some questions that are obvious, but keep in mind it's not just for me, it's for others. But you were born in Ireland, and what year was it?
I was born on July 30, 1925.
1925. In Foxford, right? In
I was
County
born
Mayo.
in Foxford, in my home then. It's interesting, when I was a child and people would ask me where I was born, I would always say I was born in the granary, and that's true. I think you call it granary in this country. They were updating the home I was born in, which wasn't a little home. It wasn't a big home by any means, but it needed adding on to and all of that. And we were temporarily living in the granary. So I was born there.
Was that the home on Main Street, or is that a different home?
Yes, and I was born, and there's a picture of it. Kevin, Kent's son-in-law showed me a beautiful picture of it. Just the house cut out. That's the house that was renovated just before I was born, and then we were back in the house again before I was less than a year.
And so that was in Foxford, right? And how big was Foxford back in those days? Do you remember?
I think there were 600 people in the town.
Yeah, it always seemed bigger to me than that.
I think by now there must be 1,000 or 1,200.
I was looking at it. There's about 1,200 as a population. So imagine that it's doubled in population to the grand number of 1,200 in your lifetime.
In my lifetime.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
Still a little town.
What was it about Foxford? It was a farm town, or what was it known for? What?
Well, it was a little town in the west of Ireland, and there were the usual amenities. There was like butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. Not exactly, but you know what I mean. Everything that was required was to be had there, and of course, because there was a big woolen mill, it gave employment to a lot of people in the wool making business. And it was a prosperous little town because of the mill. There were, every morning at 6 a.m. you would hear what we call the buzzer go off, and the people would, maybe it was 8 a.m. It was 8 a.m. and they would be all gathered, walking down to the mill for their work. And we had a convent. Shall I go on?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
We had a convent with wonderful nuns, and we had a wonderful school, which I can come to. And there was just a lot going on for a little town in the west of Ireland. It was not a sleepy town. It was an active, buoyant, go-ahead town.
It seems, I was thinking that during this time, that around the time you were born, it was really the Great Depression in the United States. Did you have a sense of that growing up, or awareness? I know obviously not when you were a bit younger, but was there any sense of America? And what was it like in Ireland? Did you have hard times, or?
I do not recall any hard times or anything that looked like what was going on in the United States at that point.
Right. And what were your parents like? It was Patrick was your father, right?
My father was Patrick, and he was just a farmer who had a number of other jobs, which I can come to later. And of course, my mother was a homemaker.
Did they go to college, or
They did not even go to high school.
Really? Yeah.
My father was, he did some bookwork, which I'll tell you about his employment, but he was an only child, and his parents were older, and he was selected, as some other young people were at the time, to go on and become a national teacher, which meant he would have to go to Connemara and learn the Irish language. At that time, we were not allowed to learn or speak our own language, thanks to the British. And so, in order to, at the same time, people were working on getting the Irish language going. De Valera, who was the first president of Ireland, said, and I'll say it in Irish for you, Tír gan teanga, tír gan anam. A country without a tongue is a country without a soul. So the big push in my middle years, as I was getting into the teenage years, was everything Irish if possible. Learn as much Irish, get back into the old routine. As it had remained in places like Connemara, we used to have teachers come from Connemara to teach us Irish because there were little, we called them the Gaeltacht. Anyway, my father was one of those people who was chosen to do that, but because his mother was aged, I think his father was gone at that time, but his mother was old, and he couldn't go. He just couldn't leave her.
Did you know your grandparents?
No, I never met any of his parents, no.
And he was an only child, so you had no aunts or uncles.
He was an only child, so he couldn't leave home and take up this thing. So he stayed.
Where was he from? County Mayo?
That was his home. He was born and raised there, as was his father. His father being Martin Howley, which was my brother's name. And so he wasn't a newcomer, no.
Right. Interesting.
He lived there all his life. He didn't have brothers and sisters, so we didn't have anything to relate to as far as other members of the family.
Right. And then Agnes, your mother, was she from that area? And
my mother, whose name was John Levy, was born in a neighbouring neighbourhood, a neighbouring town, really, Strade, which became very famous for the land leagues, the Strade Land League, by Michael Davitt, which started the Land League in an effort to get the English down. That would be back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. She was born out in Strade, which had its own little town, very little town, no really town at all. She went to school in Strade, as did her sisters and brothers. And
how many sisters and brothers did she have?
She had 6 or 7, and many of them emigrated to the United States.
Did you keep in touch with them? Did you have cousins and family get-togethers?
A lot. We kept in touch a lot with our cousins in the East Coast, New York. Albany, New York was a place she often spoke of. And that was Jack Lynch's place.
Sure.
And yes, I remember getting lovely dresses from America. She kept in deep contact with them, and sent them pictures, and they sent pictures. I don't believe I have any of them, or I saw any of them. But she was in touch with her siblings who were in New York.
Right. Did she ever travel to the United States, or
no, never, no.
Yeah, just wasn't something she was interested in, or
no.
Yeah. Did she travel much? I mean, to England, or?
Well, she didn't. The most traveling she did was to go to Dublin, and she would go every year. Cleary's used to have a cheap train ride to Dublin, and she would pack up, and I would go with her early in the morning, go to the station, get on the train, spend the whole day in Dublin, and come home
back
that evening.
That was a long day, huh?
It was a long day.
Do you recall your parents? Did they have a good marriage? I mean, I know it was a different time.
We had a very happy family, really. Speaking of my mom going to Dublin, now there were very few women close to her geographically who would do that.
Yeah.
But she had a lot of get up and go. She wanted to do things.
Yeah, she wasn't fearful of it, or at all.
No, not fearful, and also it wasn't sure could manage the expense, because everything was for people living in the west of Ireland at the time. Times were not great, there wasn't a lot of money.
Right.
But you made the best of what you had.
Sure.
And she did. She was a woman who always looked on the bright side and the positive side. And my father was much more conservative.
Right. Where did you land in all of that, do you think?
My thinking?
Yes.
Well, I am of a conservative nature, but my children tend to say, what happened to you? You used to be so conservative. You're not conservative anymore.
Really? So you've evolved in this life.
I have probably evolved or devolved, depending on how you feel now.
Well, that's right.
I would call it evolved.
I would too, absolutely. You were the oldest of 4 children, right?
Actually, I was the second. A child who was born before me was a boy. I never got an explanation, nor did I need one, nor would I have understood one. He died right at or soon after birth. God knows why. So he was number 1. I don't even know what his name was. Then I came, and after me there were 3 more.
So it was then Marty.
Marty came after me, and then there was
May. Right.
And then there was our beloved Patricia.
Well, What do you, well, how did you get along with your siblings? Do you remember? Was
Very well.
Yeah.
Marty was a kind of a difficult child.
Was
he was
he?
the difficult child in that he had a temper.
Yeah.
And my mother, who was quite religious, used to say to him, Marty, pray to Jesus that he will cool your temper. That's how bad he was.
Really?
I remember my father whipping him.
I don't remember ever seeing that, but, you know, he was...
Oh, he'd mellowed.
Yeah.
He totally mellowed. He became the very opposite.
Yeah, it seemed that way. Always kind of happy-go-lucky and
Yes,
jovial
yes,
and having
yes.
fun.
Yeah, that was pure childhood. Maturity took care of that.
Speaking of Marty, I'm curious because it seemed that you all have musical talent, and I'm just wondering if that was important, where that came from.
Well, I'm trying to think of myself. We had, as I touched on earlier, we had a convent and nuns, and we had a music school which was run by the nuns. And of course, my mother was always, let's make the best of what's available. And so she marched me down, got me a violin, and marched me down to the music school when I was 6 years old. I remember it clearly. And my first instrument was the violin. Kathleen Rowdy taught me the violin, and soon thereafter, Marty, who was 2 years younger than I, went to the music school also. And we loved it. And he became very involved in music, as you know. He was singing. He loved to sing and had a good voice.
And May was taught music.
And then May was good at the piano, and that was her profession. She taught piano for years.
Yes. And my mother was musical, very much so.
Yes, she was. She sang. You know.
She had a beautiful voice, really. Never gave her credit for that, I think.
No, nothing was ever said much, but I remember hearing her once or twice and thinking to myself, this woman can sing. She probably sang in the choir.
Well, she was overwhelmed, I think, dominated by everybody else in the room. You know, whenever the get-togethers with CJ and Marty and, you know.
Oh, yes, in her older years.
Yeah. Were there other things, arts that you were involved with, or sports? I mean, in those days, probably girls and women didn't really play, weren't active in
some
sports.
girls used to do sports on the beach and things. I don't know what kind of sports, but that was never my interest.
Yeah.
My interest was mostly in learning to read books, and you know, the school stuff was enough for me. I didn't want to. I was never good at athletics.
Yeah.
So I didn't have the privilege or the joy of being involved. In fact, I never learned to swim, although we were within 2 or 3 miles of the lake.
Yeah, I think that was common. My dad doesn't swim, and it's surprising.
It is rather on an island, and especially near a lake.
With beautiful lakes and the river there, right?
And the river there, yeah. My father used to swim in that river.
Really?
Regularly.
Yeah. And did he fish the river? Was he a fisherman?
He wasn't a fisherman, no, not really.
Yeah, you kind of assume everybody in Ireland's a fisherman and a farmer, you know?
Yeah, no.
But he was a farmer.
Oh, yes. Yeah. The bulk of his life, he had a farm of land which he ran, and it wasn't a big farm, but there was enough that he always had a boy helping him. Some young lad from the outskirts of the city, the town, would come every morning, and I remember he used to say, if my father wasn't... If he didn't see my father, he would say, "Did the boss rise yet?"
Yeah.
And anyway, I remember him having this fellow. But he was involved in other things too. He became a collector for the county council of the county council houses that people owned nearby, several of them. And he had this big ledger where he had to keep track of the rents. That's because he was a good scholar. That's why he was chosen maybe to go and do the Gaelic thing for the teaching. So
they saw something there in him, obviously, right?
They did, and he was good. He could write a good letter. He would write letters for people. They would come and say, "Could you write a letter for me?" Then he was given an honorary job. He was peace commissioner of the town of Foxford. Now that meant, as I remember, that I think it meant that he had. He was. Somebody put it to me once that he was a kind of a judge. I remember as a young child one time. There was a tinker woman. Now, a tinker woman is the travelling people, and she got in trouble because she had a little too much porter to drink. She was considered drunk, and the police in the town wanted to take away from her children. And before they could enact that plan, my father had to sign off on it. And he looked at the policeman and said, "No, I will not sign off on this because a mother cannot be taken away from her children." So I think it was the first time in my life I realised that my father had some power.
Sure.
And that he was worthy of admiration. The other time I admired him greatly was there was a good friend running for a third party in the government of Ireland called Cloneth Hollowan, and his name was O'Hara actually. I forget his first name, although I know it well. Anyway, he came to the house and I witnessed this, and he said, "Well, I'm here for your vote." And they were friends, and I remember my father saying to him, Tommy was his name, Tommy O'Hara. My father saying to him, "I'm sorry, Tommy, but I don't belong to your side." And I thought, well, that's honesty.
Yeah.
Which, even in those days, you didn't always get honesty.
Right. What was he involved with any of the political, what would you call it, liberation of Ireland, or any of the kind of
well, he wasn't actively involved,
stuff, yeah.
but I remember he had the biographies of some of the Parnell and a few people like that. I remember the little Shelfie had a book. We didn't have libraries in those days, and you know what libraries can do. They can get flooded and all the books can get wet. But he had a couple of shelves, and there would I see Parnell was one and some others, and he would often talk about Parnell, but never active, but he was he was what was then known as a Free Stater, rather than being a Fianna Fáil. Now that's the difference between De Valera and his party. De Valera was one party, and the Fine Gael were the other party, and he was Fine Gael.
Okay.
He was not for the. He was of a mind to accept. Get what you can from Britain. The Fianna Fáil people wanted to fight them all the way.
Oh, right.
And so some. I have to keep going.
Keep going, yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to take that?
No, let's keep going. We can call back.
So anyway, there's a lot more could be said about Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil.
Yeah, sure. That's a long drawn out story. What when you were growing up, did you have friends, like close friends, or were you more friendly with your family, or
no?
It was a small town.
Girls on the street, living on the street, across the street, and not down the street. There was an up street and a down street, and that's to be remembered because my husband was one of the down streeters, and they were more sophisticated. That's where the shops were.
He was a down streeter.
That's where the shops were. Yeah.
Well, we'll get into that a little bit. I was just wanted to talk about Patsy. She was the youngest.
My dearest youngest sister. Can I refer to her as your wife? Or
no, because she was my mother.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. But you had a special relationship with her. It really seemed to me. And what stands out in your memory? I know you had early memories of her, but
she was 8 years younger than I. So she was brought down to the Convent National School, St. John's National School, on her first day when she was 3 years old, and I was her sister, and I was in the upstairs room class, and I led her by the hand down, and when her hour was up downstairs in the baby's room, kindergarten, I had to go down and get her and marched her upstairs, and I was telling your children, her grandchildren, about the red velvet dress. I always remember. Can you imagine how many years ago that is? That's 80 years ago.
At least,
Yes, that's almost, I'm talking about 80 years ago, that she came up to me with her little red dress, and she was a perky little girl. She was not a child that you had to cater to. She just stood on her own 2 feet, and I remember that first day. I don't remember other days, but I remember that day. I remember that day so well.
Yeah, it's amazing to be able to track back to those memories. I often wonder, what comes back to your memory as you grow older, and because it's a lot to keep in the banks.
Well, I find incidents such as the one I just described come rather than a long story.
Right.
It's
like a flash memory.
Yeah, flash. I remember my uncle who lived in the home where my mother had just left when she came to Foxford and married my father. He had a horse and trap, which was something in those days. It was a little step up, and he would come with his horse and trap, pick us up and take us for the day to his home, my grandmother's home.
Yeah.
He would do that on a Sunday afternoon.
Who was that?
That was Uncle Pat.
Uncle Pat.
Captain Levy, yeah.
And that was a big deal, I'd say, yeah?
Oh, and I'd get dressed in my best. You would think I was going to see the Queen, which I was. She was my Queen.
Right. We talked about your grandparents and your life growing up in a small town. Did you get a sense that you were isolated, or how did you know about the world and what was going on?
My life was full. Just the school and the music. Well, the music later. I started music young enough, 6. But no, I felt very much the town was a big place to me as a child.
It always seemed that way to me, and then to think it was 600 or even just 1,200 population today. It always felt bigger.
Yes.
It always felt that the Howleys ran the town too when we were there.
Almost like that, yes.
Yeah, it was a pretty powerful kind of presence there with the Howleys. Did you travel much when you were a child, and were you curious about traveling? Other than Dublin, I guess. I mean, there just wasn't means to travel.
Dublin when I was really young, but we used to go to Enniscrone for the beach, for the sea. I probably went to Enniscrone before I was 10 years old, but not much before then. I'm trying to remember if my mother took me ever to go to Enniscrone. You'd go on the bus, but she never travelled much by bus, so she and another woman would gather the children and maybe go for a day to Enniscrone. And then as we got older,
how would you travel then? Was that horse?
We would sometimes go on the bus at that stage when I was older, or there would be a car hired. A taxi man would take us.
Right.
Yeah, and I also remember.
So you didn't have a car?
Oh no, we had no car.
Yeah. Was it because you couldn't afford it, or didn't want one, or what was it?
It was just we were not in the.
But not many people had cars.
That's
really.
right. We were not in the group that had cars. The people who had cars were mostly men. Were mostly young people who used the cars to make money, hire like what do we call it here today?
Oh well, the Uber and
exactly.
So what did you do for leisure and fun? You had your school. I know you're very academic.
I remember being totally bored. In case anybody is interested, I remember being bored on a weekend. And I had a friend who was actually born in Scotland, and she came to be with her aunt after the war. And I became very friendly with her. Name was Delia Durkin. She lived up the street from me. And on a Sunday afternoon, we would stand outside the door just looking up and down. The wind, as one of my friends called it, older friends, the wind-swept street, looking for action to see if anything would happen.
Right.
Nothing would happen.
No.
Totally boring.
How old were you then?
I would be 10, 12 years old.
So not quite interested in boys yet.
Not quite, no.
Maybe looking for a box of candy or something.
So any amusement, anything to break the silence, as it were.
Because you didn't have, obviously, televisions and computers.
There was no
we take for
TV,
granted.
absolutely not. There was no radio much.
Yeah.
I remember the first memory I have. I remember the first radio in the town when I was probably 6 or 7. And it was the people up the street by the name of Hart, like Pat Hart here now.
Yeah.
And we would go up there to hear the radio, and we would especially love to hear the sign off at 10 o'clock at night, because that was late for us.
Yeah.
And they would say, whether you were on land or sea or in the air, we want to wish you good night.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful write-up. I remember being so taken by the man's voice.
Yeah.
His elocution was outstanding.
Was it news or music, or what did they play?
There was music, and there was news and entertainment. But not everybody had a radio.
Right.
Well, shortly thereafter, my mother got her radio, and Marty and I would sit together beside the radio. You didn't listen to the radio from afar. You sat next to it.
Right.
Because it was a novelty.
Sure. You wanted to be right there with it.
Yes.
Did you have heroes or role models when you were growing up? Did you look up to anybody? Were there movie stars or people like that?
No, movie star. There were no movies. I don't remember seeing a movie. Well, when I was about 8 or 10, we went to the movies. Yeah. But we didn't have much interest.
Right.
We didn't have much interest in movies or things American. Things American were a little far away.
Right. Yeah, it was probably a little bit before all of that developed.
Oh, then that came later.
What was your first recollection of Podgene, and how did you meet? Put you on the spot here.
Well, my first recollection of him is he was older.
Because he grew up in town with you, right?
He did, but he was a downtowner.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
I referred earlier to the fact that there was the big Protestant church in the centre of town, and there was the street below it, and then you turned the corner and there was the upper street, and the uptowns. We call them uptowns and downtowns. He was a downtowner, so I didn't know a lot about him, but I knew of his existence. And he first really came into my memory when boys do come into girls' lives or memories, and that was in my teenage years. I really didn't know much about him. I went away to a boarding school for high school, and it turned out that my friend in my girls' high school and his friend in his boys' high school, Balladreen, were great friends, and that kind of brought us together. They would come down, the girl would come down to visit me, and Pauline's friend would come down to visit him, and I remember
just happened that way.
Pure happenstance. And so then we got kind of a little bit interested in
introduced to each other.
We got to know one another.
Right.
And I had thought of being a brash. I thought of him as being rather brash until I got to know him a little deeper, and there was more to it. He was still brash, but there was more to it. There was something underlying that caught my fancy. He was at that. I was inclined to be demonstratively religious, and by that I mean I would go to church, and he would come too.
Because you were going.
Because I was going.
Did you go to mass every day?
No. You couldn't, because mass was earlier in the morning. You were going while school was on. School was your main.
Sure.
It was your most.
And that was a Catholic school, so you were.
The local Catholic school, and again the nuns and the convent and all that. And the people in the town were quite religious. I should bring up at this point my very dear good friend woman, Mrs. Kennedy. I used to call her Kenny. She became aware of my existence when I was a very young child. I was hardly outgrown babyhood when I got to know her. She was a tremendous woman. She was a kind of a gifted person, not formally educated, worked in and around the nuns, mostly doing volunteer work. She somehow adopted me, so much so that I would go to her house to do the homework. Because there was too much noise in my house. Marty was the young lad at the time, making noise. And I would ask Auntie Patty, my sister Patty, to bring my book bag up to Kennedy's, where I was going to do the homework. My kids asked me one time, why did you want to have her? You used to say, will you do me a favour? And I would say, would you do me a flavour? And one of the kids said to me, was it because you thought the neighbouring kids would think you were a nerd? I said that was precisely the reason. I didn't want them to know that the homework was that important to me. But I would go to her house. She had no children. She had an elderly mother, and I could do the homework in peace.
Did she help you with that, or was this a place to go?
Yes, and her husband would too. He'd help me with the math.
Interesting.
Such as it was in those days. I am talking about 5th and 6th grade. Because I went to although at the end of a 6th grade elementary education in Ireland, you really had a good, solid basis. When you went to the secondary school then, as they called it in Ireland, the high school, you already had you already had a good basis. You had probably as good as an 8th grade education in this country now, here in America. So I used to go up there. Not alone was she supervising my learning process, but she was also deeply religious. And she used to sing, she used to have a statue of Our Lady of Lourdes, and I remember her introducing me to the Our Lady of Lourdes hymn, and we would sing it together. She had a beautiful voice, this woman. Not the kind of a voice that you would just want to hear. She just sang softly, but she sang the Our Lady of Lourdes so beautifully, and she got me turned on. She got me turned on to religion more than my mother did.
Interesting. Yeah. She had a big impact on you. Why do you think she chose you, or
for some reason? She, not alone was I happy to be aware of her and to be under her guidance, but she was happy to have me.
Right.
Because I remember when I made First Holy Communion at the age of 6, she arranged for me to having not an interview but a meeting with Mother Maura Bernard. Now, who was Mother Maura Bernard? Mother Maura Bernard was the religious woman, the nun, who established the Foxford Woolen Mills. And it isn't, as my mother would say, it's not everybody she would meet with.
Really? Yeah.
But Kenny arranged that I should meet her on the day of my first Holy Communion, and I went to the convent, and I remember her sitting there. She was an older woman then, greeting me, and of course the mention was made, would I not like to be a nun?
Yeah. Prime candidate, huh? You had other intentions, I'd say.
Well, I was only 6.
Yeah.
And I don't
But
know.
that was Irish Catholic way, wasn't it?
That was
to
the Irish
plant the
Catholic way.
seed,
I
you
don't
know?
know that it was overtly mentioned, but it was
Implied.
You got the feeling. Yeah.
Well, that was her job too, right? To
That's what she had to do.
Keep the troops going, feeding the troops. And it was, everybody, I think, expected that their son or a daughter would become a nun or a priest.
Yes, it was
right?
not. It was something that was looked forward to.
It was a great honor.
Very positively, yes.
Right. High expectations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just back to Podging, I was curious. Well, did you have an immediate? I was looking up the definition of soulmate. It's a person with whom you have an immediate connection the moment you meet.
Well, once we met in a mature way.
Yeah.
See, what I told you about the first
It took you a while.
Yeah, he had a brashness about him, and probably that brashness appealed to me because not many other kids in my little town in Ireland had that way of going. Had that brashness. Sometimes you have to be brash to get ahead.
Yeah. Why do you think he had that? I mean, was that just his personality?
I'd say it's the personality.
Yeah.
I'd say because he had a brother who was exactly the opposite.
Right.
At the time.
Pascal or Bob?
Well, Bob was the one, and Pascal was timid. They didn't have his way of handling things. He was a kind of a direct kid, and he didn't hesitate to speak up to the powers that be.
Right.
He would speak up to the local pastor. He would speak up to anybody he felt should be spoken up to. He didn't shy away.
But in a nice way.
Oh,
right?
yes. So he had to do it in a gentlemanly way.
Well, that was the thing that always struck me. He was truly a gentleman. I mean, that was...
Yeah, he had a way with him.
I never heard him curse.
No.
Once.
No. That was not his way.
Not once.
When I say brashness, it shouldn't be misconstrued as anything wrong with it.
Right.
His brashness was just a little more. He was more forward than a young man of his age.
Right.
More, not afraid to address the question.
He was a boxer, though, wasn't he? Too.
He was
had
a boxer for a while, and tried to set up a club
in Foxford.
Yeah.
I know my experience. Well, the O'Hara children always looked at him as really a hero to us growing up, and he had that presence as a role model.
When the kids were growing up,
absolutely,
yeah.
and he was so positive, right? It didn't matter what was going on; it was always going to be. It's good. It's the bright side of things.
Yeah, it was not negative.
But never saw him really get angry, and there's many times where he could have, but not. Sure, you would kind of get uptight and snap a little bit, but never really.
There were no outbursts.
Never. Right? I never saw him drunk, although it seemed like he always had a drink in his hand,
right? He liked
his
drink, but
he never.
He was in control.
Right. Yeah, and just a gentleman and honorable and funny and telling stories. Always, well, of course, he was always talking, right? That was
I used to think that he was a bit too loquacious.
Yeah.
When I was in the impressionable years, which for me in the United States were probably my early years in medicine, I used to think he talked too much. But he was admired and made an impression because of his ability to talk and discuss, and he wasn't afraid to discuss any subject.
He was a leader, really, then, in that sense, that he stood out among the crowd, I guess. Yeah. Did you have any other boyfriends or attractions growing up?
Shall I tell the honest truth?
Yeah, why not? No.
I may have briefly dated one or two others, but he really was my first date.
Yeah. Swept you off your feet.
I have to admit that.
No, that's beautiful. Yeah. They say, I was just back to the soulmate, that it's a person who connects with you in every way, on every level, which brings a sense of peace, calmness, and happiness when you're around them.
He did. He did all of that.
Yeah, and I think that was obvious, watching you and really what powerful role models both of you were, and
yes,
how you
the
lived
fact
your
that
lives.
everything can't be perfect, and that you have to understand the other person, and if there's something that maybe you don't quite like or would not do, you have to accept it in the other person.
Right.
That's very important for young people. I was just reading something, or I heard it on the Catholic station just in the last day or two about the importance of. They were mentioning, this is kind of cute, Vincent. They were talking about the fact that many times a young couple will say, that the husband will say after a few months of marriage, you know, I think I married the wrong woman, or I think I could have married somebody different. And that's the time when you're tested.
Yeah.
You know, he said that's not, it was a priest talking, and he said that's not uncommon to get a feeling that maybe you should have married somebody else.
Yeah.
But that's when you're tried, and that's when you're going to show your strength.
Well,
You haven't married the wrong person, it's just a phase you're going through.
well,
That's the importance of the gift of marriage and the gift of perseverance.
well, and it's like anything, you have to work at it and
Absolutely.
sacrifice and
Absolutely.
give more than you take, I guess, is probably part of it. What would you say was the secret to your success, or what contributed to it? We were equal partners, and
I did success in the marriage.
yes,
Tolerance.
yeah,
I remember what you used to say to strangers. Tell me, what's the secret of your long-term marriage? I remember some of the medical people, I think it was the dentist or maybe somebody else who asked him one time, and he said, well, you should be consistent. You should be, and then he says, rather you should be consistently inconsistent. That was his mode of talking. No, that wasn't that funny one. The reason for our long-lasting marriages, I'm consistently inconsistent. That was just jumbo.
right.
That was his way of getting out of a serious.
Not answering the question.
Yeah.
He was good at that, though.
He was good at that. He could work around it.
Yeah. Well, I think, people like that are prepared for those situations, but it always seems like they're not, right?
Yeah, I know.
He kind of had that notion that how he would answer that. You know,
I mean, I always thought, oh, that's such a cop-out, consistently inconsistent. He's just trying to use words, which was what he liked to do.
But tolerance was it, and you had it. And you would have to have it with the family and the ups and downs and travails of life. I mean, it's normal, isn't it?
You have to have it. I mean, you have to have it all the time.
Yeah. Probably more now than ever, really.
That's humility too, recognizing that your way and your thinking is not always the right way or the only way.
Right. Yes. Well, we often get stuck in our ways too, and stubbornness.
As you get older, yes.
I think it's an Irish trait too, a little bit. It's that stubbornness to lock in.
Absolutely, it is.
Not want to move off of that mark. So you got married. We'll just fast forward through all of your courting period and time. But when did you go? You went away to school then, to university.
Well, after my 5 years in the convent.
And that was at Swinford?
Secondary school. That was a Bal, St. Louis Bal. And my best friend in high school is right here in Southern California. She calls me regularly.
Really?
We were together in high school for 5 years. She's a nun now, my age, up there, and having medical problems. So after the 5 years, then I went to the University of Ireland at Galway, NUI at Galway. And I was pledging there a year before I was, I think. I think he had gone there. I forget. But that was really the time of our, when we really clinched together.
Yeah.
Yes. First year in the university. It was bad for the studies for me. I couldn't do both.
Because you couldn't concentrate, or
I
you must have been in love.
I guess so.
Yeah. Distracted.
Yeah, I was greatly distracted, Colin.
And that must have been tough for you, because you were an academic. You loved to do your studies.
I was distracted.
Yeah, well,
Very
that's okay.
distracted.
I mean,
He wasn't, because he said, I will study. For sure, I'll begin to study on St. Patrick's Day. That was far enough away from the exams.
Yeah.
That's the kind of a student he was. And then he could grasp the whole thing in the short. Everybody else took a year. He would grasp it all in 3 months.
Right. Well, and so what was he doing in the meantime? Just kind of.
In the meantime, he loved the movies.
Really?
He would go to the movies with his friend. He never smoked nor drank in those days.
Yeah.
He didn't fish. He loved the river. He would go rowing on the river. He was a rower. He would rent the boat. The college had a club there, and he would rent the boat. And we had pictures at the time of the boatman, helping him to how to. He had a boat on the river at home too. He was very fond of the river, and he would do it in Galway. Go up the River Corrib all the time, and then he would take me with him up the River Corrib.
And you didn't swim. That must have been nerve-wracking for you. Did he swim?
Oh, he was a swimmer.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't nerve-wracking for me. I felt totally safe in his
With
presence.
him, yeah. I'm curious why you didn't learn to swim and it was available.
Fear.
There. Yeah, just.
You see, you're not strong in every point.
Did your siblings swim?
I don't think so.
Patsy did barely.
She did, yeah. Well, I got to where I barely swam too.
Yeah.
I took lessons after when
yeah.
we came here.
Came to California.
There was a certain amount of. I don't know why anybody should be fearful, but there was also a time constraint.
Yeah.
I thought I didn't have enough time. And you don't need to have time. All you need to do is thrown into the water.
Well, that excuse is still used today, isn't it? It's an age-old human condition. I don't have time for this. You know, I can't afford the time. And the man said, you can't afford not to put the time in. Whatever it is, you know, if it's music or exercise or whatever, diet. You
Same
know,
thing.
It doesn't really change. That condition hasn't changed at all, has it?
Not at all. That's the human condition to some extent. That's one side of the human condition. The other side, Vincent, is where the children know they have to do it.
Right.
You know, now it's time for me. Like Patty was telling me about her oldest granddaughter. She's smart, she's beautiful, she's outgoing, cannot stand the pool. Afraid of it, doesn't like it.
Right.
I was surprised to hear this.
Yeah.
I hate the pool, she said, but she didn't use the word hate.
Right.
She said, I don't like the pool.
Right. Well, it's genetic.
It's genetic.
Great grandmother was that way.
All of a sudden.
Came back. So when you were growing up, it's impressive that you were so academically inclined. Not so impressive, but that you were committed to it. You know, I don't imagine many kids were like
yes,
that
I
way.
was committed to it,
Serious.
I kind of got the message, you know.
From your parents, or who was it?
I got the message very much from my parents. If you're not going to take advantage and be educated, you're not going to be successful. They instilled in me the desire for improvement in myself and improvement in life.
Right. Did you see that as being well, you're the oldest too, so you had to kind of be the leader and set the example. Was there pressure there?
No, I was happy that they did that. I thought that was good parenting.
Yeah. Was there any jealousy among your siblings in a way?
None.
Yeah. But you were all relatively academic.
Trying to be proud of one another.
Yeah. Stuck up for each other.
Yeah.
When did you decide that medicine was for you, or did you decide it?
Maybe other people decided it for me. When I was in high school, in the convent with the nuns and learning, I loved Latin. And I remember deciding before my last year of high school, I would love to be a Latin teacher, a maths, a mat. You know, I loved that. I wasn't crazy about it, but I thought to myself, wouldn't you like to do that? And I thought, yes, I would love to be a high school Latin teacher.
Huh.
So I get this scholarship to the university. I could choose any discipline I liked. And so the elders of the town, the parish priest and the teachers and the friends all said, oh, now you have this good scholarship, you must take advantage of it. And a little whisper kind of started, why wouldn't you choose medicine? It takes the longest, but you have a scholarship to cover all these years. That's how it came about. And I did what I was told.
But women weren't being pushed into medicine at that time.
More so than in this country, but they weren't. No, women weren't being pushed into anything.
Did you feel pressure of that?
No, no. At first I didn't.
Yeah.
At first I didn't. No, I was.
You embraced
I
it.
got the thinking that my people had, and that was reach for the highest bramble, so to speak. That doesn't explain it exactly, but. No,
well, you were competitive. You had to be to go and have that desire.
Once you got in there, you had to be competitive to some extent. But women were more. You could see more women in this state, in this country at this stage than. No,
so that would have been what, 1940, early 40s war.
I remember the day Hitler invaded Poland. What year was that, Vincent?
I don't know.
It was 1939, was it not? Was I going to high school? I was 6 years in the convent with the nuns, and I went when I was 13, so I would have been 19. So that would have been 11:34. Anyway, we don't want to get into a bunch of numbers. What was
in
your
that
question
ballpark.
now? What was your question again?
Well, that you're going into medicine. It was during the World War years, and then actually that's an
yes.
interesting question. How did that affect your upbringing, your life in Ireland? I mean, Ireland was neutral in World War II.
I have to
right?
tell you, I felt very little result from the big war in Europe.
Yeah.
We were young enough, we were far enough away from it, not geographically, but we were, as
Removed
you know,
from it.
emotionally, we were
Yeah.
removed from it. I mean, when some little scrimmage happened in Belfast or something, it came as a shock, a surprise. You know, we knew nothing about the persecution that went on in Europe during the persecution. We
Right.
quickly learned it, of course. But Ireland was totally non-involved in the war.
Right.
And that affected the children, or didn't affected the children positively. They
Right.
weren't going around.
And you didn't
work.
want for anything. You weren't hungry, or
No, there was never no. Ireland was not is not. Now it is not. It was then a relatively poor country.
right. But you had your basic needs. You had your
Very
food.
much our basic needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
They used to say, Vincent, we had our bacon and eggs,
Yeah.
and really anything you would need in the way of what was necessary. Because
basic
because
necessities.
we weren't exposed to a lot.
Right.
I mean, we didn't know about Chinese food, and we didn't know
Right.
about Mexican food. And later on, then years later, Dublin got some of these restaurants.
Well, it became an international city. It occurred to me that when you got into medicine, what was it that drew you to it? Was it the idea of helping people? Was it the financial idea? Was it the idea of having that standing in the community? What was it?
Yes, I have to say that I do not believe that I was drawn towards doing good for humanity, which is kind of sad to say, but I have to be truthful.
Yeah.
I did not have that burning desire to help mankind.
Right.
Number one.
Right.
Number two, I did have the hope of improving my own life and my standing in life, which is the selfish way. That's mainly what I saw it as, a step in the right direction,
Right.
a step up.
Well, but you were ambitious, and you had that ambition, and you were competitive, right? And so you were following your.
I was following my instincts to some
Right.
degree, but I must say not very noble. I wouldn't say that the way you phrase it as helping mankind, which we often hear today, that's what motivates people. No, I wasn't that.
I don't know.
Kind.
I don't know if that's necessarily it. I was just interested because it was such a big decision in your era to say, I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to fight. All of really the odds were against you in that respect, and to consider where you ended up.
The other thing about it, I think, Vincent, was I didn't give it an awful lot of thought. You know, you weren't. I don't know, was it the fact that we were living in Ireland, which was a very easygoing society?
Yeah.
I don't think I was faced with that kind of decision. This is a big decision. It's a lifetime decision. I don't think so.
And there wasn't any discrimination
More
against
casual.
you.
I was
Yeah.
just more casual than that.
Right. It was an easy decision, it seems. Were there other women in the medical
There
school?
were
with
two or
you?
three women in my class.
Yeah.
At least there were three that I can recall now.
So the medical school was in Galway, or that was
Yes,
your college?
yeah,
You didn't-
in Ireland the system is this: instead of going to pre-med to a college for 4 years, you go straight into the medical college. Now the first year is devoted entirely to pre-med subjects, anatomy, both botany, chemistry, and physics. Then the next medical school is 6 years. High school was 5 years. That's right, 11 years. So the first year concentrates on these subjects. Then when you go into first med, it's a lot of anatomy, physiology, and again some botany, or chemistry rather, not botany. Botany is in the pre-med years. So it's a kind of there's a flap over, you know. It's not like in America today where preschool is just 4 years of pre-med, is 4 years of pre-med, and then you go into med school. There was a little overlap between pre-med, first med, second med. It was really in third med that you got involved with hospitals and diseases. Second med was a lot of physiology and anatomy. You see, there was an overlap there.
Did you ever feel like you'd made the wrong decision, or was it tough on you, or were you excited about it?
No, I have to say I never thought I did the wrong thing.
You're enthusiastic about it, yeah. And your parents must have been proud of you.
Sometimes I think I would love to have been a teacher, but then the rest of my life would have been different, and I was happy with my life.
Yeah.
I married the right man.
What did your parents think about this man? Let me ask you to clarify that he was known to us as Paugene, which is little Patrick, but his real name was Stephen Hardy, right?
His name was Patrick Stephen McGuinness Hardy.
Right.
He was called Stephen in Ireland, and when he came to this country, the United States, it quickly became known to him that people are not known by their second names. Mm-hmm. They're known by their first name. So we had to. I remember the family meeting with Bob and his family. He said to them, "You have to call me Patrick from here on in, because that's what they tell me at work."
Uh-huh.
Bob said, "Well, if you're going to be Patrick, we're going to call you Paugene."
Yeah.
It's funny how that took hold, Vincent.
Yeah, it's cute though.
That really took hold.
Yeah.
The only people who
was Bob older?
Younger.
Paugene was oldest.
Paugene was,
Bob,
yeah,
and
there were
passed
2
on.
years between them, I believe.
Yeah.
Or 1 year. I think maybe 1 year.
They were
Because Paugene is 2 years older than I, and Bob was 1 year older than I, so that means there was a year between Paugene and Bob.
Right. What was your parents' impression of Paugene? I mean, he had grown up in the
Well,
town, but he was what was he, an upstreeter or a downstreeter?
He was a downtown.
He was a downtowner, and you were an uptowner. So
I was from uptown. Now, they never knew him as a child. They never knew him.
But they grew up all together. Everybody
But they
grew up.
got to know
How 600 people in a town do you not know each other?
Isn't that the strangest thing? I'm telling you about the downtown and the uptown. It was real.
Yeah.
That dichotomy was real.
And it was more economic breakout?
Well, there might have been that. See, the shops were all in downtown.
Yeah.
The shops, our grocery store was next door, so that was all right. But the other there was a chemist shop and a dry goods store and a clothing shop, and the hotel in town was downtown. There was more activity. Mm-hmm. And then the schools were all downtown. So a lot of times you didn't really know much about the other downside of people. But the knowledge of Paugene came to my family mostly after I got to college.
Right.
When we would come home in the summertime. And even then they didn't know much about him because we kept it a secret.
What would you do during the summers? Did you have jobs?
Very hard, very boring. No, there were no jobs to be had.
Yeah.
You simply...
And no school, like there was no summer school.
There was no summer school. You simply had to amuse yourself.
Dances and lakes.
There'd be dances to go to at night, and there'd be the pictures, the movies would come to town and stuff like that. And you'd go to church a lot.
Yeah.
But it was boring. I remember standing on the street, I told you, the windswept street, looking up and down with this girl I met from Scotland. She was Kenny's niece.
Can you imagine, though, the kids today having to live in that type of environment, what they do?
They'd go mad.
Yeah.
They'd go crazy.
So did you read during the summer?
I wasn't a great reader during the summer, I have to admit. I don't
You probably needed a break anyway from just...
That was it, probably. There was so much stress and so
pressure,
much structure and so much desire to do the best you could that you were happy to go home for the holidays.
Sure.
We'd never call them vacation, we call them holidays.
And what would that be, a couple of months then?
Yes, it would be from like the middle of June till the 1st of September.
Oh, that's good, good summer.
It was always 1st of September we went back to college, school. Remember, from the time I was 13, I was away from home.
Yes.
That was the last time I ever spent any. Of course, I'd come home during the vacation time, the holidays. And
were you ever lonely being away from home? Did you miss it?
When I first went to the high school, it was awful. It was an awful, wrenching experience. But I got over it quickly.
Yeah. Well, all the kids were. That was kind of the way it was, wasn't it?
And it was a wrenching experience, especially for, where there was nothing much going on in town. It wasn't so much that you were leaving a lot of activity, you were leaving your family. How
did you develop the relationship with my mother because of your age difference, and then you were gone for a lot of it?
Oh, yeah.
And I remember her giving you a pep talk about going away. Didn't she say something?
Yes, she did. Yeah, here's what happened. When I went she was deadly lonely, and I was deadly lonely for her. I was really, really lonely. One time I insisted that she come on the bus to Galway to visit me in the university. Well, she used to say, I won't see you for 100 days. She would count the days from the 1st of September till the week before
Right.
Christmas,
Right.
when I would be coming back for the Christmas vacation. And I'd come back to the house and we would be overjoyed. And I remember one time, you know, we weren't equipped with a lot of fancy stuff for Christmas, but I remember I played Santa Claus for the family. And this little girl, I was then about 14, so she would have been 8. That's right. And she said to my mother, Santa Claus is wearing Noreen's shoes. The cutest
She
thing.
picked up on
But she
it,
said
yeah.
it in such a way as,
Innocent.
you better believe it. It's
Yeah.
not. She is Santa. This is Santa Claus,
Yeah.
but she is wearing Noreen's shoes.
She
Isn't that cute?
Yeah.
And I remember. See, these are things you remember.
Right.
Oh, so wonderful.
Well, just the innocence of it too, you
The
know. She
innocence
picked
of
up
it.
on it.
Yeah.
And she probably figured, "Where are you? You know, you're not
Exactly.
here." And
You know, the other thought was on my mind is that she was so smart. She knew darn well that I was not. That it was
what was
I.
going on?
Yeah.
But she wasn't gonna ruin
No,
it.
she wasn't going to break the spell.
Yeah. But you had that relationship. You had that
Very
magical.
close, very
yeah.
close. Then I invited her this time, and my mother said yes. So she rode the bus with me back to the university and stayed with me in the room, slept with me and everything. And then the time came for going home, and of course we were sad. She went back home. I put her on the bus, and when I talked to her, I don't know. We did have phone calls, but not many because we had no phone in the house. Nobody had.
Yeah.
Even yet, they didn't. She said to me, yes, she said, it was not nice, she said. Nobody spoke to me on the bus.
On the bus. Yeah.
They're so innocent and so unexposed, you know. She
Yeah.
didn't realise that people don't chatter on the bus
Right.
the way they do around the corner at home.
Right.
But she'd tell me these things. Nobody spoke to me. You can hear it, you can just hear her say that.
Well, and that was a big adventure for a young kid to do. Take that
Indeed,
bus
it
ride,
was.
you
Not,
know,
not many parents would have allowed it.
Yeah.
But they allowed it because I wanted it.
Yeah. Well, they trusted you, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, moving back to Pagina, you were married when? What do you remember? What
We
the year
got
was?
married
What was the situation there?
Well, okay then. Now, the end of college came, and he graduated a year or more before I did, maybe almost 2 years. And he took a job in Dublin for a while, and we would be in communication. And
what did
then
that?
he
Was it
went to
communication
England.
letters or phone calls?
yes, letters mostly, no phone calls.
Yeah.
Phone call wasn't easy to have. Letters. Then he took a job in England because all the young engineers were going to England, and his friend had preceded him and arranged for him to come to a certain company and all that. Well, that was kind of a blow to us in a sense. At that time, I was doing what's known as the residency training in a hospital in Dublin, and we would talk occasionally on the phone, but mostly by letter. Then he decided, oh yes, I was going through the residency. Then after that was all over with, a year or so of that, living in the hospital and working with, I remember I was assigned to the head of neurosurgery, the brain surgery stuff. And I thought, it was very hard to understand. It wasn't a very sophisticated, this is now in medical school, this was not in residency training. So you really didn't get it was more or less treated lightly. You didn't need to know much about it. You'd be standing by the surgeon doing this deep surgery operation, but you really wouldn't be in on it because you weren't yet a doctor. Then, after that, I went back to Galway for a number of months. In the meantime, the hour came. He got the call to California, not to New York. No, excuse me, his first call was to Detroit. Where his uncle, who was his sponsor, as you had to have
It was
papers.
Detroit or Chicago? It was Detroit.
That's where his uncle was.
Yeah.
But he steered him towards a construction company in Chicago, an engineering company,
right.
where he was master of he was on the field that were building the...
Was that at the airport, right?
The airport.
At O'Hare.
What do you call that airport?
O'Hare.
O'Hare.
Yeah.
And
what year
while
was
he
that?
was at O'Hare's family, then I came to New York. I flew a plane from New York to Detroit, and he and his uncle picked me up.
Yeah.
And of course, that was a joyful reunion.
Yeah.
Bob was in New York at the time, his brother, and he accompanied me on a flight from New York to Detroit. We got married 5 days later.
Wow. Did you expect that? Did you know that was happening? Yeah.
There was nothing else to do.
But your family didn't know.
Yes, they did.
They did.
They did. They did. I got a telegram from them. That was fashionable in those days.
Yeah.
Telegrams were. Remember, we used to be. When I was thinking I was talking to your dad. The telegrams would be read out. I remember the word abundant joy. Maybe something they said in the telegram. May you be blessed with abundant joy. I remember the word abundant.
Yeah.
Which was nice. Anyway.
Was it a big party? I mean,
yes, there was a restaurant in. It was Father Pat's parish, and he married us, and that was lovely.
Was my mother there for the wedding?
No.
No sibling. None of your family was there. Yeah.
No.
It was too much for them to travel, I guess.
Oh, it was impossible. Remember, this was barely after the war.
Yeah.
Barely.
Yeah.
I mean, we were one of those wartime weddings, brides. No, I was very overjoyed. See, I was deeply in love.
Yeah.
And that accounts for a lot. You can even miss your primary family, your beginning family, and get over it.
All right.
It was joyful, very joyful.
The power of the emotion was so powerful, yeah.
And I remember we moved, the day we got married, that night, there was a big party. I think maybe I had the first taste of alcohol that I ever had that day.
Really?
And the same goes for Podgy. Neither one of us ever had a drink. And then when we
How old were you when you got married?
25.
25, yeah. So your courtship had gone on for about
7 years.
10 years or more, maybe, yeah.
Partly behind closed doors for the first years.
Yeah.
Because my parents did not see having a boyfriend, girlfriend type thing and do studies at the same time. They thought that was incompatible, which in a way it was.
Right.
It was, Vincent. I would have...
You managed it though, didn't you?
Excuse?
You managed to have your relationship.
We managed it. Which
it was possible to do.
Which I think is again proof of what it meant and what the Lord meant by it.
Yeah.
Coming to Chicago...
And you were a doctor, you were a full-fledged doctor?
I was a full-fledged doctor.
Yeah.
But I wasn't carried away by any means by the being, the thought never entered my mind, you're somebody now. I didn't feel that way about it. I felt very disconnected in some ways, despite my joy with being with him and all of that. I felt in a way disconnected, And here after we left the hotel and had our honeymoon, which was lovely, and I remember he took me to a beautiful Irish show. It was a ice skating thing, and it was all green, and this suited me, having just left Ireland.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention my sojourn in England. We can come back to that another time. But then we decided we had to go to our home. Well, our home was a one-bedroom apartment, just the room we lived in.
Yeah. One room apartment.
Yeah. He was then with an engineering company and had a lot of friends. Well, the friend that knew what was going on with him had a friend, a doctor, whom he told, this friend, he went to his doctor, his name was an Irish name, O'Connell or something like that, and said to him, I have this friend in my engineering school, in my engineering firm. He told his doctor, and he just brought his wife from Ireland, and she's a physician. This was when America was screaming for interns after the war.
Right.
The boys were not yet back,
Yeah.
And anyway, between one thing and another, he invited me over to St. Joseph Hospital, which was a nun-run hospital. I had not been used to that in Ireland. It was not nun-run at all, run by nuns. Anyway, it was kind of a privilege to get in, and at the same time they wanted me badly.
Yeah.
Very badly. And I remember I teamed up with a fellow from Germany, who was the first year too. The first year of marriage and the first year and an internship are the hardest two things you could put together.
Mm.
The internship is so demanding.
Mm-hmm.
But
you have two marriages there in a way.
Two marriages. Yeah. And two getting used to strange new situations. Wasn't easy, Kent, Vincent. That was very hard. That was very, very hard. And then he, out of the goodness of it, oh yes, while I was an intern, we decided we needed a better apartment, and he found an apartment on the west side. And before that internship was over, his brother Bob and his friend Neelan, Aidan, decided to come west. The move was west.
From New York.
From New York.
West to Chicago.
And where do you think they landed? In my little one-bedroom apartment.
In the apartment, yeah.
This was the goodness of Porgy, see.
Right.
And my tolerance.
Yeah.
I should have said,
no way.
Not here.
Yeah.
Anyway, they were good though. They didn't interfere with our lives. I was gone a lot.
Right.
I had to
You're
stay.
Working, busy,
I had to stay 36 hours at the hospital, come home for 12.
Yeah. Wow.
Go back for 36, come home for 12. So that kind of helped me tolerate it.
Right.
And they were nice kids, and they were from Ireland. They were
Right.
kids. They were
Yeah.
doctors, but they were really kids.
Yeah.
You know, a year older than I or two. And looking back on it was harder. To look back on it makes me feel much harder about it than I did at the time.
Yeah.
I tolerated it, you see.
Yeah.
I always remember, this is the time we didn't have a car here in America. And Bob said, "You're nobody without a car in the United States."
Yeah.
So I'm dragging home one evening. I had to work late instead of coming home 36 hours and coming home. Yeah, well, I was coming home late this evening. Or it was a weekend, something about it. It was like I came home, and what do you think I saw? I saw these guys, these three, Porgy, his brother, and his brother's friend, Aidan Neelan, driving a car down the street. Bob had talked him into buying a car.
Yeah.
A used, old, terrible car, although we took it to Michigan once. That didn't suit me, but I accepted it.
Yeah.
I accepted it. And
Why didn't it suit you? Just spending the money, or
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if we were to get a car, we would have to get a right car, and we should wait until we had the money to get a proper, decent car. That was my mother's attitude in life. You know, buy what you can afford, but wait until you can afford it. At the time, I was suffering from raging migraine headaches. Classical migraine. I had them in medical school, and I brought them with me to Chicago. And I remember when I was an intern, they used to tell me that sitting by an oxygen tent would help you. I went to the doctor, and they were trying medicines. Migraine is hard to treat. It still is hard to treat.
Do you get the migraines now? Or
no, thank God I don't.
You got over them?
I got over them quite early, actually. They were probably stress-induced, carried over from the internship, from the medical school through the internship. But they were horrible, horrible. I remember driving up to his uncle's place in Michigan after we were married and having to sit in the car with ice on my head.
Yeah.
Again, I should have stayed home, really. But what he wanted to do, I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I'm mixing
You're a
things
good
up.
mate.
I was mixing things up a little bit now. Yeah, he knew that too. He knew that I was doing stuff that was not easy. He appreciated it.
What you were going through,
He
yeah.
did.
And it was probably not typical of many couples in those days, right? To have two people working that hard in careers, you know? I mean, it's a big deal.
Looking back on it now, it was really unusual.
Sure.
It was unusual.
And to come from a foreign country and not know anybody
The
or
whole
have any
thing was
plan.
unusual.
What was...
One of the girls was telling the story here the other night about one time in the apartment. Well, we moved to the west side before the boys joined us and everything, and it was kind of a decent apartment, although the refrigerator was down the hall. Remember, this was again after World War II. And it seems that I was cleaning up the place, and I must have mistakenly written a letter to my mother that stated, "I am now cleaning walls." Well, she was just astounded that I would go to America as a full-fledged physician and be cleaning walls. They brought it up here the other night. I don't know, I must have told them. But, you know, the School of Hard Knocks, it makes you a stronger person. Nobody gets it easy. You know, some people have hardships that are not like cleaning walls,
Right.
but there can be worse hardships.
But the cleaning walls is kind of, we always say that there's a Howley gene about cleanliness and cleaning and all this kind of fixation on it that we used to
Born out there.
we used to joke with my mother. She'd clean the house before the cleaners would come, you know. And it's like, what are you doing? And I think we all have a little bit of trait of that in keeping things in order and clean. But say there's something to be said for that being part of a genetic
There's a
inheritance.
genetic component to it.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad preparation for future life, I suppose. It's better to be that way than be a slob.
Yeah. So when it seems to me you came out to California, and we were talking about this a while back. That Pajin always seemed to be enamored with Hollywood and the glamour of the movies and the palm trees and the sun and all of this. Am I right about that? Or
the thing that enamored him most, he did love the movies.
Yeah.
He did. But he really loved, I remember John Fitzpatrick used to, there was a show where he would put on the beauties of California. It was not a television, a radio show. John something Fitzpatrick. He loved that show describing the blue Pacific.
In Ireland, he would hear the show on the radio.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the lure to go west was really the Pacific and California.
Do you think he had that in his mind? Did he ever talk to you about it, or was it just something?
Oh, no, he talked a lot about it.
He did.
Oh,
yeah.
he talked a lot about it.
So that was his dream.
And his dream was realized.
Yeah. In a big way.
In company with his profession.
Right. Yeah, but it's, to me, it feels like there was a destiny there that somehow he willed that to happen.
I think so.
And the career went with it. I mean, there's lots of opportunity on the West for what he did, of course.
That's right, Vincent. It was kind of I would have to say, a God-inspired thing.
Yeah.
You know, how many people can work their profession and at the same time satisfy their more superficial dreams?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to get it all to balance and work and have a partner to do it with.
And have a partner to deal with that.
Well, you probably couldn't have done it without each other, really.
No, I would never be here if it hadn't been for him.
Well, vice versa, really. I don't know. When did you come out then to California? It was mid-50s?
We came to California in 50, the year Tara was born. No, Tara was born in Chicago. No, am I wrong? Wait a minute, I'm wrong. Tara was born here. Our first child was born in Chicago. I explained that earlier. So we came here in, we came here in 55.
55. And then when did my mother come out? Because she came...
She came, did she come to Chicago?
No, she came directly to California, I think.
So
maybe just for a visit
we
at
moved
first.
Out here. We came to Chicago, to the West Coast in 55.
Yeah.
She came when Tara was a baby, 56. She came in 57, something like that,
Okay.
early 57.
And did she come out for a visit, or was she coming out for a permanent?
She came out permanently.
Yeah. To be with you?
Yes.
Or just in seeking
I
opportunity?
think I was the one who sponsored her.
Right.
Because in those days you had to be sponsored.
And where did you live? Did you live in Manhattan Beach first?
We started out in Pomona. I worked for Permanente, Kaiser Foundation. Very nicely and very enjoyed a year with them and their offices in Pomona. The nearest habitable place was Pomona because for us it was the other side was his work and this side was mine. I was in Fontana. The offices of Kaiser were in Fontana, which was east of Pomona. Pajin's engineering company was the other way, so we were in Pomona for a year.
That was the middle point. Yeah. So she joined you in Pomona.
She joined us in Pomona.
You must have been happy about that.
Oh, I loved that.
Yeah.
I think her first year was not that easy.
Yeah.
But she had the strength to stand up. She mastered it.
Well, she did that all of her life, didn't she? Just the moves and just soldiering on and getting on with the. As I tell my kids.
She hadn't gotten really into her teaching profession in America, which is another step you have to take. I mean, teaching in Ireland is one thing. Teaching in the United States is another thing. So she had to transition that, and had to go to school a little bit. And later, after we moved and she moved, she was in a better position to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think now is probably a good time to take a little break, and we'll come back and talk about life in California and
that
the
would
rest
be nice.
of it.
That's a good point.
I think it's a good break,
yes.
and I want to ask you a few more questions about my mom's entry into California, and then CJ's arrival, Colum's arrival.
That's worth another.
There's a whole chapter plus there, right?
That's worth another sitting.
So we'll come back to that. We'll take a break and we'll come back a little later.
Okay, that's fine with me, Vince.